Great. So hello, everybody. It's 6:30 here in Fort Lauderdale, and I'm Hunter Ohanian, the director of the Stonewall National Museum and Archives. And I'm very happy to have all of you here. Today is July 1st. We have now begun the second half of 2020, and we are about probably March, April, May, June, probably 3.5 months into the pandemic that none of us have lived through before this. So as of today, there have been almost 3 million people in the United States infected with the coronavirus. It has been an amazing time in this country. There have actually been more than 125,000 people in this country who have lost their lives due to this pandemic. And so we're now at a very pivotal, sort of interesting point in it. And I place all this stuff out there just for archival purposes. Probably in December 2019, we had no idea about this thing. January, we knew very little about it. February, we heard maybe a few little inklings about it, but then in March, it happened big time. And so here we are now, 3.5 months into it. It's sort of astonishing to think 125,000 people have been killed by this situation as a result of it. The governments, by that I mean state, local, and federal governments, have been telling us that things were getting better, so everything shut down, the economy shut down in the United States. First time since the Great Depression, the economy shut down. And so things started opening up about 4 or 5 weeks ago. And unfortunately, it seems like things are beginning to reverse. We've heard from the medical people that there was a first wave and a second wave. And we're now at a point where the experts are telling us we're still in the first wave. And so we're 2 days away. Today's July 1st, 2020. We're 3 days away from July 4th here in Fort Lauderdale, or in Florida, on the east coast of Florida. All the beaches will be closed for 4th of July. They're afraid of having people together. Because the virus is spreading among people. There is no vaccine at all. Everybody is being encouraged to wear their masks, and we do have to wear those outside all the time. We have a government right now in 2020, which seems at best indifferent to the human toll. But there are many of us that are doing the best that we can to actually be sure that art and commerce is continuing, and that artistic production is continuing to go on. So at Stonewall National Archives and Museum here in Fort Lauderdale, just to remind everybody, we are one of the largest LGBTQ organizations in the United States that actually preserves LGBTQ culture, primarily from the last quarter of the 20th century to the present day. We have 28,000 volumes in our library, volumes of books, as well as 6 million pages, 2,700 linear feet of documents in our archives. And so as a result of what's happening in the current situation, we've decided to move our cultural production to an online version. And so that's why we're creating these weekly Zoom events and talking to different cultural producers each week. And so if you're not subscribing to Stonewall's public programming, please go to our website at stonewall-museum.org and you can sign up for them. We have been doing a lot of programming over the last 2 months, and we have a lot of things scheduled for the next several months. And I want to do a shout out now to Emery Grant, who is our Deputy Director, who is here on this call with us, who's providing a lot of the technical and scheduling. Emery, thank you. We're so grateful for all the work that you do. Thank you so much for everything that you do to make all this happen. And actually, Emery is on vacation. Imagine having a vacation in the middle of a pandemic. It's sort of like, whoa, how does that work? But he's trying the best that he can to relax from all that stuff. And then also next week, July 9th, Hugh Ryan will be here. And Hugh Ryan actually wrote the book, When Brooklyn Was Queer. For me, I don't know a time when Brooklyn wasn't queer, but it's really interesting, and so we're very happy that Hugh will be here next week. That will be July 9th, next Thursday, and he will be here at 6:30 as well. So let's switch over to Chris Bogia. Chris, let's say hi.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for attending, and Hunter, thank you for having me.
Well, you're Chris. So everybody should know, I've known Chris for probably 10 plus years. He and I have been friends. We've been colleagues. We've been confidants. We've known each other for a long period of time. Chris, where are we finding you this evening? Where are you now?
I'm in our office, in our house in Astoria, Queens.
Yeah.
And it's doubled as well. It's my husband's office for the last 4 months. Nonstop, 24 hours a day, but I have been fortunate enough to be able to go to my studio during the day. So this is actually kind of like a novelty for me to be sitting in here talking to you.
Well, it's great to see you, of course. And so, Chris, just tell us a little bit, how is New York feeling today on July 1st, 2020? You've been there through the pandemic. Tell us how it's felt.
You know, April was really tough here. You know, for several weeks in April, all I heard out of my window here or in the Bronx in my studio were sirens. And it was very scary. I mean, people really were adhering to the protocols that the government or the health organization had asked us to do. Everyone stayed home. Things are starting to loosen up a bit now, but I am happy to report that I do see nothing but a sea of masks when I have to go to Home Depot or anything like that. It doesn't seem like anyone is objecting to those standards. I mean, New York was hit very hard, and I think the people here, they'll take it seriously because, I mean, it's not abstract. This really happened here. And almost everyone I know lost someone or knows someone who lost someone. So.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. I mean, all of us know someone who we've either lost or who's been sick. And what was really interesting about the first part of this is that it seemed to affect older people more. And now they're talking about the idea that it is impacting younger people. Thankfully, the death rate is not as bad for younger people as it is for older, but still if you watch the news, it's still an important thing. And we are losing lives each day as a result of this. And so all I can say to everybody again is just, keep your mask on when you're in public because it is a big deal. So just to let everybody know what's going on, Chris and I are going to be talking about artist residency programs. And in particular, we're going to be talking about the Fire Island Artist Residency program in New York. And this program will be recorded and it will be posted on our website and people will be able to download it. So if you know people who are interested in it, they can download it from our website probably in about a week's time. So they can see it if they're not actually here. So please feel free to share it with individuals who you think might be interested in this. So Chris, let's start and sort of have a conversation. Let me sort of go to make sure everybody's aware of your background here. And I've got to pull this up. Of course, you and I know each other quite well, but hang on a second here. So Chris Bogia, Chris received his BFA at NYU and received his MFA from Yale, and he currently lives and works in Queens, New York. In addition to his work with FIAR, he is an instructor in sculpture at New York University. Chris also is a recipient of a 2018 grant from the Pollock Krasner Foundation, a 2018 Queens Council for the Arts grant, and a 2017 Rima Hort Mann Foundation's Artist Community Engagement Grant, and a 2015 Tiffany Foundation grant. In addition, Chris was an artist in residence at the Queens Museum Studio Program from 2016 to 18. And of course, Chris has had a solo presentation at Ms. Gallery, and a number of other places, and his work has actually appeared in a variety of other publications as well. So what's interesting to me, and let me start out here with my first question for you, Chris, is you kind of, like many of us, you sort of balance the space between making work and administering work. So yeah. Tell us a little bit what that's like, just generally speaking, about what it's like to balance that life between a maker and someone who actually facilitates other people's work.
Sure. Well, I mean, the first thing that I always think of is splitting up that time. You know, I've always had a full-time job. I've always had full-time jobs while pursuing my studio practice. And for a while, I was an administrator in the art department at NYU, where I'd gone to school, and it was a very comfortable, wonderful place. And it was during that job that I hatched the idea for FIAR as kind of like a rocket ship to sort of have my day job, but have my day job be like my dream day job. And so when I go to the studio in the morning, I typically look at emails and address FIAR needs for a few hours, and then I wheel over to my work table and I work as an artist for the rest of the day. And I'm lucky that, you know, I was able to leave my other full-time job, and I still have my teaching job. I juggle lots of things, but you know, for a long time, FIAR was really, it was like my job, and then my studio practice was like my art practice, and I couldn't really see them as one thing. Over time, that really changed. I started to see FIAR as sort of a social practice. In other words, a way of art making that's not invested in physical objects and more involved in social interventions. I started to see it as a social practice piece of my studio, which really made the two things coalesce in a way that even changed my studio work in dramatic ways, because I felt like a lot of the activism and things that and identity as a queer person that I wanted to put in my work was already happening in this social practice project, which was Fire Island Artist Residency. So I don't know if that answers the question exactly, but it's evolved, my answer to that question, over time.
What's interesting is that there is no perfect answer to any of these questions.
No, I know. But secretly, I'm like, Hunter really knows me. I bet he has an idea what he wants me to say when he asks me this question.
No. All right, so bring yourself back to being an MFA at Yale.
Mm-hmm.
So when you were at Yale, did you imagine yourself being an arts administrator?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, prior to grad school, my jobs had been in like high-end retail and like window dressing. So I don't know what I was really thinking. I knew that I mean, I've always been someone who's gotten involved in things. Like I was that kid in high school that was in like 17 extracurricular activities and barely pulling C's. So, you know, I am definitely a get involved kind of person. So it's not surprising. I did, when I was at Yale, though, between my first and second year, work as a camp counselor for like a high-end academic camp that took place on the campus. And I really discovered my love of teaching that summer. And I knew that pedagogy would somehow play a role in whatever jobs I hoped to have parallel to my studio practice. So when I was offered a job at NYU to be the academic administrator, it was like a beam of light, like beaming me up to the UFO that I was waiting for. So that's really where my administrative chops came. And then I started running a summer program there almost from the jump for New York City public school kids. And so I attended camps as a kid. Like the camp counselor thing was also part of my, I always say it's like my spirit animal is like a camp counselor with like a clipboard and like a little cravat.
That's very sweet. You know, it's very sweet. And thinking about like that necklace made out of hemp with your whistle on it.
I'm into it. I'm really into it.
All right. So, Chris, just remind everybody your site, and we're going to talk a little bit about your work a little bit later on. But if people want to see your work right now while we're talking, not that they don't want to see us, but if they want to be looking at work, it's chrisbogia. Tell us what your site is.
It's chrisbogia.com.
Yes.
So Bogia is the last spelling of my last name.
All right. And just to remind everybody, Chris and I will be chatting for about 45 minutes until about 7:15. And then post your questions in either the chat line, the Q&A part, and then we'll consolidate those quick questions and ask those at the end. But please throw your questions up there so we can look at those as well too, and we'll consolidate those quick questions and put those up as well. All right, so Chris, I have so many things to talk to you about. As you know, I've spent a lot of time doing residency programs, as you have as well too. But other than, I would have to say that the biggest relationship I've had with the founder of a residency program, besides you, has been with the poet Stanley Kunitz. Stanley and I became good friends when I was the director of the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, and he, along with Robert Motherwell and Alan Dugan and other individuals, founded the Fine Arts Work Center, and I was very fortunate to be the director of that program for 10 years and have been very involved with it over these years. But the idea of a residency program, let's just talk a little bit about this sort of abstractly. When I think about residency programs and the history of them, I think about Mrs. McDowell, who created her little place up there in New Hampshire, or I think of Yaddo, or I think of these patrons who decided that it was important to create a space for artists, writers, musicians, composers to work. And this is really, artist residencies are a late 19th century convention, although certainly the de Medicis were involved in it, but that was really kind of a creation for fee, or a fee for creation system. The idea of actually giving artists a place to work and providing them with support is really an American 19th century convention. So before we talk about FIAR, talk a little bit about what the whole thing about artist residencies actually mean. Why do they exist? Why do they happen? Why does society allow them to happen? Why do we write checks out to them? Why do we give money to them? What's the output of all this stuff?
I mean, residencies are, I can't speak to the decades of history to them, but when I started FIAR, I thought about how difficult it is financially and time-wise and work-wise to be an artist working in a metropolitan area. And, you know, that's where the most opportunities for artists are, and yet they're prohibitively expensive to exist in. And, you know, if you're a sculptor like I am, you can't really work in your kitchen. You actually have to have a separate space that you're renting in addition to your home. And I mean, no, I can't think of that many professions that aren't like regularly salary professions that need to go out and walk that tightrope financially. And it's about being able to make the space in your mind for your work too, when you have other jobs and things. And so residencies really, I think, come to the rescue of that contemporary plight that I know so many artists, including myself, have faced during their creative time. So, you know, to give an artist a place to go and say, like, you're not going to work your day job for 2 weeks, a month, 9 months, whatever it's going to be. We're going to put you up. I mean, I think the best residencies give artists a financial stability in terms of a roof over their head and meals and space to work, where they're less burdened by all those distractions that you're constantly doing alongside this profession that ideally is supposed to be your main focus in life, right? Like, other professionals get to devote 40 hours a week to their jobs. Emerging artists are lucky if they get 10, you know, even though it's just as important to them to pursue that profession. And I think residencies are really where, you know, our government doesn't give a whole lot of money directly to artists. The NEA, you know, after the 1980s, lost a lot of funding. And so the responsibility for a lot of this has been taken up by residencies.
Yeah, and that's a really good point about the NEA, for example, because I've been in this business long enough to remember in the days in which NEA panels would look at an application that said we're going to benefit 18 people, and individuals on the panel, well-meaning artists on the panel, would say, well, why are we giving money just to 18 people? And I have to do a shout out to Mario Garcia Durham, who was one of the program officers at the NEA, who actually understood the importance of artist residency programs to the point in which the NEA now has a separate category just for artist residency programs. And it funds those artist residency programs simply because they put together a panel, and I've been pleased to serve on it, but it's a panel that actually supports the production of new work, and they understand everything from Ucross in Wyoming to the 18th Street Center in Santa Monica, to the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, to the Fine Arts Work Center, to Virginia. It's all over the United States, in which the support of new work is really done by our federal government right now. And we don't give out artist grants anymore. Just as you say, we don't give them out because of the Jesse Helms days and the late 1980s and early 1990s, but at least we support artists in residence. So that's really very important. So let's switch to the program that you started. So just so that everybody knows, so Chris, you were involved in founding the Fire Island Artist Residency, and that was actually 10 years ago. And you founded it along with Evan Garza and a few other supporters. And so I have really sort of two questions I'd like you to address about that. One is, why Fire Island? And number two, talk a little bit about the idea that this is the only LGBTQ artist residency in the country. Why is that important?
So why Fire Island? You know, I'll tell a little story. I mean, I lived in New York for 11 years. You know, I moved to New York for college. I was here as a 17-year-old. 11 years later, after seeing pictures of Fire Island in the back of like the magazines you bought, you snatch at a gay bar for free that tells you where to go and what to do. Like in the summertime, they'd always run a couple pages in the back that would show Fire Island, and it was like this crazy disco scene and like, you know, shirtless, muscled guys. And I have to be honest, like I was going, you know, I like bears, which are like chubby, hairy guys, and who were not in those pictures. And I also was going through like a really heavy, like Nina Simone, Leonard Cohen phase. So like the music wasn't appealing either. So I didn't want to go. I grew up on the South Jersey Shore every summer. Like I don't know, like I didn't see what was so special. And then someone cute invited me out. I went out there on the boat. You take a little ferry from Sayville, Long Island, and you pull up at this dock. And what I didn't realize is there's actually two historically LGBTQ communities on Fire Island. There's Cherry Grove, which started really in like the early 1900s, and then the Pines, which sort of started in the 70s. I didn't know that there was a difference. And we pulled into Cherry Grove, and I noticed like people of every age, every race, every gender expression, and all of their pets and various physical abilities, like getting off this boat and going towards these tiny little huts and cottages. And I was just like, wow, I really misjudged this place. This is a really spectacular, completely unique, historic community that's been right under my nose all this time. As a gay man, like I was kind of ashamed. The next morning I woke up there, and a man put a paintbrush in my hand with white paint and said, it's paint the walk day, where they paint stripes on either side of the walk so you don't totter off of it at night after a few drinks. And they started telling me like the history of Fire Island and of Cherry Grove, and you know, their struggles there, and coming out in the 50s, and what that place meant as a sanctuary and a safe place, until now that it's like a celebrated, expensive resort community. But it has all these layers and all this history that I was incredibly blown away by. And really, it was that morning after going back into the house thinking like, wow, like I would love to come out here and do an artist residency. Like it would be good to participate in one. In other words, like I was like, some rich old queen needs to do this, like make this thing. Cause I mean, LGBTQ artists should see this when they're merging and both commune with it and contribute to it. And really that idea, I kind of put it in my dream drawer. And then a few years later, at this point, I was like a regular a few summers later, and I invited my curator buddy, Evan Garza, to come out for a few days. And I told him the idea, and he was like, we should just do it. And I was like, really? Like, no one knows who we are. We are like beneath emerging. We are like barely visible, and we have no money. And he was really encouraging, and I was like, you know what? I've saved $6,000 from my job at NYU. I could rent a house for 2 weeks, and we could post this opportunity on Facebook and see what happens. And really, it was my love of that place and sort of my own wish fulfillment of wanting to be an artist in that place that made it feel like something that I knew was needed and could be helpful and important. Your second part of your question, I'm blanking on. It was why Fire Island? Oh, why be the first or the only? I mean, look, there was nothing else like this. Like, I applied to residencies, you know, when I was an art student, and I went through art school like so many artists. And when I was doing that, kind of bizarrely, I would say, I was the only out gay person in my year of classmates at NYU, and I was the only out gay person in my time as a sculpture student, which overlapped with 2 years of students at Yale. And the painting department had tons. I mean, I had gay friends in grad school, and they were art students, but for some reason, the sculpture department, there were queer people who would later come out, but at the time, it was just me, and I felt like I really wanted to have conversations around my work that were with people who could maybe feel more comfortable just speaking freely about what they thought of the work. You know, when you're, at least when I was in school, like one of two things would happen if you had work with explicitly queer content. People would either completely ignore it or maybe only focus on that. And I felt like I had great critiques from both students and faculty in grad school, but there was that piece of my work that I wished I could have been challenged more on. You know, not acknowledged, because everybody acknowledged it, but I felt like no one was going to be like, hey, like you know, no one felt comfortable critiquing it. And so I thought, wow, if there was an LGBTQ residency, like that could be the starting point of questions and conversations that never get to happen in situations where people might not feel as comfortable being frank and participating. I mean, I experienced no homophobia in my schooling, but I think that it could have been like I yearned for deeper conversations. Like when a queer visiting artist would roll through, I would like body check people to sign up for them because I was like so hungry for someone to come in my studio and be like, hey girl, I know what you're doing here, but let's, you know, think about it this way. Like no one was going to do that, right? Except for those people. And so if I created a residency where all the visiting artists were LGBTQ and all the residents were LGBTQ, like then it was almost like an experiment, like what could happen in that situation. And
so Chris, you've raised just an absolute ton of good questions here and ideas, but let me sort of follow up with just one thing you said here at the end about, so what does it mean to be in a group of gay artists, LGBTQ artists in the bigger sense of the word, in a place that's physically known for being a welcoming environment? Why does it matter that the only LGBTQ residency program in the world is located in Cherry Grove on Fire Island in the summer? And just so everybody knows,
yeah,
what, 5 weeks, 6 weeks? And so it's a short period of time.
It's actually 4 weeks. It's very short.
4 weeks. All right. So what is it? Tell us what that means.
I mean, Cherry Grove is the oldest gay town in the United States, if not the galaxy, right? So historically, it's just a very charged place. It's like a place that, like, I'm glad that you said it's welcoming and accepting, and I do believe that it is, but Fire Island, Cherry Grove is also a suburb of Long Island. You know, it's like it's subject to that region's foibles as well. So it's kind of actually a clash of cultures, even though everyone is LGBTQ. I would say the level of interest in social justice around queer people is you know, it's all around the charts. And so I do think, though, compared to the straight world or anywhere else, you don't know what it's like to be in a completely queer community until you've spent time in one, right? Like until you've gone to Provincetown and spent a week during Bear Week or whatever, where everyone kind of knows, has a lot of the same lived experiences, and people really let their guard down, I think, and I think a lot of like love and friendship can happen. I mean, I've seen residents come out and be so inspired by the locals that their work completely becomes about the locals, and that's something that I can never predict and don't necessarily require, but it's really beautiful when, like, my favorite thing about FIRE is when those lines blur and the community and the artists really influence one another. And I can think of lots of instances where that's been just an incredibly inspiring thing for me to watch from the sidelines as an administrator. But I think, you know, those bringing LGBTQ people to a place that's so charged with history and has, you know, there's not a lot of written history about Cherry Grove. There's like one book, and it's a wonderful book, but a lot of the history is just passed orally from the old timers to the newcomers. And for emerging LGBTQ artists to be those newcomers in that situation, having these histories told to them firsthand, I can't think of any more important kind of experience you could have if you're going to call yourself a gay artist. Like, it just seems like a very valuable thing that I feel strongly that as many people who want to have it should have it.
Yeah, no, that's really important, and particularly because, I mean, my orientation is coming from running a residency program in Provincetown, which was not a LGBTQ organization, but yet it was in an LGBTQ environment. But so as I look at the screen of you and me here, I see two cisgender males. I see two white males here.
Mm-hmm.
And so what does it mean for those who are neither cisgender, who are not white, but are part of the bigger community of people who would consider themselves queer, as we do? So how do they get some purchase in relying upon us to believe that these kind of communities are safe places for them to exist and for them to make work, and then also to add another level to it? Things have changed in this first quarter of the 21st century, where we're talking about communities where the real estate values have gotten so high, the cost of just a loaf of bread could be 3 times what they're used to. Getting there could be 5 times what they're used to spending. We're talking about exclusive communities from a class, from a race, from a gender standpoint. So talk to us how that works at FIAR.
Yeah, I mean, Cherry Grove really started out as a gay male community. I mean, men had more income than women and could purchase these little cottages on this island and create a safe environment for themselves. Women were there from the beginning. Actually, straight women from Broadway were kind of the first settlers with their queer entourages to come to the island and make it queer. But I would say it wasn't until later, it wasn't really until the AIDS crisis that women started moving into Cherry Grove. Again, because of, I think, socioeconomic challenges, a lot of those men and women were white. I'm happy to say that FIAR, you know, we're very proud of our inclusive agenda. I mean, it's something that I feel very strongly about and that I know my board feels very strongly about. And it's not really about just diversity and making sure that there's a number of POC residents or, you know, I mean, it's a given that we want a diverse group. We only actually take 5 visual artists and 3 poets a year. And so I want to make sure that that's an interesting group where everyone has something new and unique to bring to the conversation. And, you know, I do express that to my jury that rotates every year, and they make it a priority. But it's not just about that. It's also about equity. It's about recognizing, you know, why there aren't as many POC applicants and why there aren't as many POC artists in general is a more systemic question of equity in the country that I feel very comfortable saying that FIAR is always aware, has always been aware of that, and I feel like more than ever we're striving to uphold those ideals and as well as challenge them constantly. You know, I think that's another really important thing.
So let me jump in here and let me sort of move to the question about, you've touched on this a little bit, but I want just a little bit more about why does it matter for artists to be in a queer community while they're making work? Talk to us a little bit about why that matters.
I'm trying to think of a good answer for you. I mean, lead me a little bit.
Well, again, I'll go back to what I said before, which is the fact that many artists don't want to identify as black or white, male or female, gay or straight. And there are many opportunities out there. So, so you have chosen, and you've spent 10 years, you've been the founding director of FIAR, and so the organization, one which I support as much as I can, is an organization which is there to support LGBTQ artists. You've talked about the sense of place that it has in Cherry Grove, but just flesh out, and I know you know the answer to this, I don't need to lead you into
No,
it.
I'm sure I do. I'm sure I do.
But sort of talk about what the camaraderie means as far as being within a group of like-minded individuals,
Sure.
particularly in a society which is predominantly heterosexual.
Yeah. I think there's just a level of joy and comfort and ease when your daily routine is in a completely queer setting. Like, you know, we're all used to wearing different masks and different hats in different situations, whether it's with our family or at our jobs, or, you know, what neighborhood we're in, at what time. Like, all of those things are things that queer people kind of forget that we're even constantly juggling. And when you're on Fire Island, Cherry Grove, those things don't all go away, but I do think that they're greatly reduced, right? Like, the amount of those kinds of hoops that you have to jump through are greatly reduced. And so you really are just being in yourself at your most, I mean, ideally at your most comfortable. I mean, it is a beach. Like, I mean, people take breaks and go lay on the beach. It's not only is it you know, it's a resort town full of queer people seeking joy and celebration, and you can't help as an artist in that situation to have that influence you, you know, and I would hope in a very positive way. I think it's not just about being around a lot of gay people, it's about being around a lot of queer people that are like having a great time and really happy, you know, and I think that that's an extremely healthy environment to be in, especially when you're just trying to like find some creativity within yourself. Like, there's so much positivity. I mean, I would say, like, on the beach, I can only say what other residents have told me, but residents who are trans, in many cases, have told me after FIAR that, like, they've never felt more comfortable on a beach before. You know, it's a clothing optional beach. Like, a lot of times what they're referring to is like being nude on a beach, not just being on a beach, and they've never felt more comfortable, safer, and happier in an environment. Now, that isn't always the case, but I would say almost every single person who's, again, not a white cisgendered male has found the most kind of relaxed feeling when they're actually on the beach itself in Cherry Grove.
Yeah, and it's one of those funny things where, like, being on the beach for all of us is a very revealing thing, regardless of where we are. We have to show our bodies, we have to show our whiteness or our brownness or fatness or skinniness or our maleness or femaleness. And so it's something that we all know about being able to show ourselves. We've had a question about POC, and I'm very sorry that we've not been clear about that. So when we use the term POC, we're using the term people of color. And so that can be brown, black, it can be whatever. But we're trying to make a distinction here between what some of us might think about white supremacy and versus everybody else. It's about Caucasians versus everyone else. Not that anybody's better or worse. We're not vilifying everybody else. But when we use POC, that's what we're talking about. So just to remind everybody, I'm Hunter Ohanian, and I'm here with Chris Chris Bogia, who is the head of the outgoing head. We'll talk about that in a second, Chris, but the outgoing head and the founding director, founding co-director of the Fire Island Artist Residency in Cherry Grove in Fire Island. So keep on putting your questions up on the chat. I see there's a question up here as well, which I'm going to put up in a second. Well, actually, I think I'm going to ask this quick question now. And so people should just keep on throwing their quick questions up there. So there's a really good question that has been put up. And so I'm just going to read it, Chris. You can probably see it there as well. What are your thoughts about the limitations that many artists have if they're juggling their full-time jobs, their finances, their obligations, and their studio practice? If it is so important to have time and face time in residencies, what are some of the other options? So for me, this is a really core question, because we think about the idea that we have to study art in school, we have to learn our skills, we have to learn things that are going on, and then we have to expand our career. But talk a little bit about why artist residencies in and of themselves are important.
Well, artist residencies are important, not just because of the time and space they give you. There's two other things that I think are really important about them. One is the community. You know, you're with other artists all day, every day, which for those of us that have full-time jobs and have to juggle all those things is not something we get to do. I mean, all my friends aren't artists, and I have to make an effort to go to their studios and see them, but to be in a community of artists, I find that very motivating, and I find it motivating for other artists. It kind of, when everyone's there working together, I feel like people work happier and harder, and I think that that is a benefit. And then the other benefit is something that I didn't know existed until I actually did my first residency, which incidentally was 5 years after the founding of FIAR. I was accepted into the Queens Museum Studio Program, which is not a residential studio program, but it's a museum that gives artists space within the museum that you have access to. And I think this is true for, and that's the other useful thing. And the reason it's important to have institutional support, whether it's at an overnight residency or a residency in a museum, is because it's like a force field from the self-doubt that you feel as an artist every day that you're working in your studio. Like, no matter how many things I get, like an award, I still roll into my studio at least once a week and be like, oh my God, this is never gonna work. This is gonna be terrible. When you're in a residency, like, you have this like imaginary, gauzy, beautiful force field that just like pings all of those negative feelings away. And so that's a really unique experience that I feel like only institutional support like a residency can give an artist, in addition to the community and to the time and space. But to the question that was asked, it's asking is, like, what are some other options besides residencies to maybe get some of those things? And I would say, like, the community part is really important, and it's something that I think any artist can begin to build just by showing up and creating relationships with other artists whose work they admire. I know that in some of the most discouraging, darkest, busiest times in my life, when I've had the most jobs and financial strain and littlest amount of time in the studio, having a studio visit once a month where someone comes to my studio and I go to their studio, that is a magical part of a residency that you can actually conjure at any time. And I think that it's some of the most valuable advice I've ever been given has happened in those situations. And some of the best opportunities for exhibiting my work have come from those really homemade situations.
Yeah, no, and that's really very good. So we have a very good question now about other artist communities, new artist residency programs that are coming online. And I want to encourage everyone. I'm a bit biased about this. I was very much involved with this organization. I haven't been involved with them in a few years. But I want everyone who is on this call who cares about this to write down an organization called Artists, ARTISTS, communities.org. And so it's the American Alliance of Artist Communities. That's their website. If you just type into any search engine. So, you know, I became involved with artist communities probably 25 or 30 years ago. At that time, there were only 18 artist residency programs in the United States. I just took a quick peek at their website. There are now 500 artist residency programs in the United States. And I will put a guess out there that 99% of those artist residency programs welcome LGBTQ artists in their programs. Fire Island is one which is exclusively LGBTQ, but the majority of these programs are about the creation of new work. And so if you want to go, and I want to spend our last time talking about how people can apply to artist residency programs, and how they can be successful and what they should expect and what the expectation should be. And that's, we could spend a whole hour on that alone.
Yeah.
But please, it's a nonprofit organization. Go sign up. It doesn't cost you anything. And the beauty of the organization is you can, artistcommunities.org, the Alliance of Artist Communities, you can search by, or you can filter it by your discipline, by the amount of time, by how you want to go in there. And so they will send you deadline dates, and it doesn't cost you anything. So if you're interested in doing a residency program or learning about new ones, this is the biggest resource. And just as another, so it's artistorganizations.org. And then internationally, there is another organization known as ResArtis, ResArtis.org, which is the international one, which is mostly European, but there are other residency programs in Asia and Africa and South America. You can learn about those, and there's some wonderful programs there as well too. So Chris, I want to digest this next question, but while we do that, if you were to say, you've overseen now 3 panels, I'm sorry, you've overseen 10 panels that have made selections. If you could give people 3 or maybe 5 pointers,
yeah,
for applications,
mm-hmm.
what would be the most important pieces of advice? What would be the 5 most important things that you would want any of us as makers to know when we're putting our applications forward?
Okay, number 1 is easy. Follow the instructions very carefully. And that, it might sound ridiculous, some of the specificities they ask, like your images need to be this size and never in this format and only 5 minutes of video max. Like we get sometimes 500 applications, and I can tell you our jury has to select 5 artists. If there's someone who's spectacular but they broke a rule, they're just thrown out because we have to narrow it down. So follow the rules. That's really important. Check and double check everything before you send it in, because in addition to following the rules, if a director gets an email that's like, I screwed up my application, can I redo it? We say yes, but your name has been written down. Like you don't want to already be causing drama from the jump. The next thing is really important is when you're asked to provide a CV or artist resume, don't get discouraged. I mean, I applied for grants that asked for, there was like a field this big and they were like, list your solo exhibitions, and I had to leave it blank, and I still got what I applied for. So don't be put off by those things. Those are still fields that they're putting down, but it really comes down to the work samples that have been submitted and the proposal, if a proposal is asked for. And I really think people overthink these things like crazy. Like, a proposal is just what you would do at that time. And if you're showing 10 paintings and your proposal is, you like these paintings, I want to make 10 more, that is the easiest way for a jury to say, like, wow, we know exactly what we're going to get with this person. That's great. You know, like, don't feel like you need to, like, create a new opus out of nothing, because actually that looks suspicious. It looks like someone who may not come entirely prepared. It's also fine to say, I'm not sure what I'm going to do, but this is what I've done before, and I'm going to bring these supplies and see what happens.
So Chris, let me ask you, a question. The question I get asked a lot is, what kind of work should I show? Tell people a quick answer. What work should they show?
You should show your most recent, strongest work, the work that you're the most interested in continuing the pursuit of. That's it.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree with talk about leading questions. That was definitely a leading question. I would definitely agree with that. I would show your strongest work. And you know what? None of us are our best judges of our strongest work. And so you need to be sure you've got somebody in your orbit who can be who cares about you, but also can be honest. So who can talk about, not that they're going to give you a recommendation, but talk about your honest work. Chris?
Absolutely. And I would also say that ties into the last point that I really want to make, which, well, second to last, which is your artist statement. This is almost always asked for, and it can be a really stressful thing for an artist to write about their creative process. Artists, there's really no absolute right way to do this, but I would say using your normal language that you normally use when you talk to someone rather than overly academic language is really important. It's really important to just, I like to imagine that, like, it's an opportunity for you as an artist to, like, shrink yourself down and sit on the viewer's shoulder in front of one of your pieces and say, this is what I was thinking when I made this. These are the things that I'm interested that inspired this. And, like, they're made this way. In other words, these materials and this methodology. Yeah, I don't think it needs to get more than that.
Yeah, no, that's a really good thing to imagine. Take yourself out of it and imagine somebody else. So let's go to some of these quick questions. A British paper recently published a survey that indicated artists as the least useful career. Sorry, I disagree with that, but I understand it. Showing a complete lack of understanding and value of creative practitioners. This published during the lockdown, where we have entertained and distracted people from the current situation. Of course, here in the US, we can talk about the impact of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, which I think are great, but it doesn't leave any room for the humanities, but that's a different story. It also included a graphic, presumably by a designer. How do you think we as artists, especially LGBTQ plus artists and other minority artists, continue to fight for support, funding, and residencies in this altered world? And I do believe the world has been altered, where resources are being redistributed. And so this comes to us from Belfast in Northern Ireland. Chris?
That's a great question. I mean, when I was faced with that same problem, I decided to start an artist residency. You know, like, it didn't exist, and I wanted it to be real, and I had enough people in my corner that wanted to help me do it, that was my solution. And I think the solutions really have to come from us, the marginalized communities, because we know what we need the best. And I will say that now that I've created this community, I get funding from the state, and the state supports it. So I think it's no one's going to actually give you the thing you want. You kind of have to make it yourself, but that's when you take lots of really good pictures and then you start writing some really good grants.
That's really good. And you know what, I just want to underscore what you said, in the sense that we actually have the power. And so if we actually do things, and Chris, you are an inspiration to all of us, because we actually make that happen. And so that's really good. Let's get to a few more of these questions. We're going to wrap very soon. So we have a thank you for the talk, and then so here's a very sort of timely question. Again, we're in July 1, 2020. How do you think our current pandemic has changed the role of queerness in the residency and art practices for you and for other people in the very recent past and foreseeable future, i.e. Historical cruising spaces, and how identity in digital spaces?
Oh my God, that's a massive question.
It's a huge question. And Chris, I'm going to complicate it now that we're sort of wrapping down. I'm going to complicate it because you and I have both seen the fact that between Provincetown and Fire Island, we've seen people of color raising some kind of flag to say, in Fire Island and Provincetown, they don't necessarily feel it's a safe place or it's a place that's accepting. And
right.
We've seen these organizations be challenged by this. It's been, and for those of us who care about those issues, it's been very vexing. So I know we're running out of time. Emery, allow us to have a few more minutes here, but this is a really quick question.
I think the best answer is that I have to continue to challenge myself to think about solutions. I mean, when I started FIAR, when FIAR was started, it wasn't just me, by my co-founders and I. It seemed like having a diverse group of residents was the work that needed to be done, right? But bringing residents that maybe aren't as comfortable with those environments into them then requires like a further sense of responsibility. And that's something that I'm continuing to explore. Like, how responsible is a professional studio residency to, for example, the mental health of its residents, whether it's regarding discomfort about race or any other myriad issue? I think it depends on the resources that those organizations have. One thing FIAR has done is that we've partnered with the Callan Lord Center, which is a free LGBTQ health center in New York City, to have a on-call counselor available 24 hours a day during the duration of our program. So any resident in distress for any reason, like FIAR can respond to that, right? But specifically about race, we really try to talk to our residents prior to their arrival to really let them know what they're going to encounter and what they may not encounter. And I think it's really important to be really transparent about those things so that people come with a full understanding of what they're going to experience.
I think that's absolutely right. And I just want to say a few things as we wrap up here. Number one, if anybody has any more questions about issues regarding to race or gender or acceptability within residency programs or their importance, I hope you go to stonewall-museum.org and find my email address. I'll tell it to you right now. It's hunter@stonewall-museum.org. And I will be very, very happy to answer any questions, have a conversation with you about that. Chris, will you be happy to talk to anybody?
Absolutely. This is something that I literally think about every single day, and I'm really happy to continue that conversation with another person instead of the person inside my head.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely true, because you and I are very similar that way, that we think about this. I was going to say shit, but I can't say that. Sorry. This stuff all the time. And so it's nice to have good conversations with people. and you know, you can't be in this business doing this stuff unless you actually want to get the work out there or get these ideas out there to actually help people to do it. And so, so please, if you're here, just reach out to us. If I don't answer your first email, just bug me or bug Chris and say, you know, you want to answer that, you know, I want an answer. And so that's perfectly fine to say. So I just want to thank you, Chris. You have done an amazing job. So just so people know, because of the pandemic, there is no Fire Island Artist Residency this year.
Correct.
Tell us how that feels after 10 years of being the founding director.
This was going to be my 10-year anniversary. My partner and I, who run it together now, we're planning on stepping away after this year, and I was so looking forward to having kind of my last lap around the sand and to see it through. So it was a heartbreaking decision to make, a very hard decision to make, for like lots of reasons. I mean, I was happy though that Fire Island Artist Residency was able to respond in some way to the pandemic and to our cancellation. We used a portion of the money that we used to rent we exist in rental properties on the island every summer, so we rent houses. And since we didn't have to rent those houses, we took some of that money and created a fund for any alums of our program that were experiencing financial hardships due to the pandemic, and then and non-competitive. All they had to do was write and say, here's the address to send a check. And we divided up the amount of money we had by the number of people that requested it, and we were able to give over $500 to half of our alums, which felt really good to be able to do. A lot of organizations are doing competitive grants during COVID to help artists, but I've applied for them and not got them, but I also feel like if you're really stressed about paying your rent, it's different than like an artist opportunity. Like, you shouldn't have to compete for that. Like, I wanted to make it so that our community of artists that we've worked with could just have that support. Yeah, no, that's really important. And so I see there are a number of people here, and we're going to wrap up now because we're past our time. Emery, again, thank you for sticking with us. And so again, email us if you have any questions. As far as artist residency goes, I only have one piece of advice: apply, apply, apply. I was just going to ask if I could say that. Don't get discouraged. Right. Like, I have gotten so many rejection letters. I mean, I know my bio looks fancy, but like, I wish you could see the amount of rejections that I had to absorb and move past before any of that good stuff happened. There are people who've done FIAR that have applied 5 times before they got in. And it's not because you aren't a fantastic artist. It's a very competitive process, and you just have to get used to applying. The more you do it, the easier and better you do. Yes, that's absolutely true. And remember, they're human beings on the other side of the process. So as Chris said, be sure that you follow their guidelines. You may hate them, you may hate us, but it doesn't make any difference. We've got to process all this shit. So just make it happen and give them what they want. If they say no show postcards or anything, whatever they say, just do what they say. I'm sorry, we hate to be told that, but you have to do what they say. All right, so next week, July 9th. Hugh Ryan. Hugh Ryan. Can I give the plug? Sure, go ahead. Okay, so for those of you watching, Hugh Ryan was a visiting artist at Fire Island Artist Residency last summer. He gave an incredibly amazing performative talk to a packed house of folks, many Cherry Grove seniors who really thought going into it, like, who's this kid? He's not going to teach us anything we don't know. People left amazed. He is such a good speaker. His book is fantastic, and I adore him. That's my plug for Hugh. Thank you. No, that's totally great. I mean, I think he's great. And so for those of you who are not on our network, go to stonewall-museum.org. There is a place for you to sign in. Paul Lasicki's coming, from Finkelstein's coming. Great people.
Yeah, I was talking this week with Urvashi. She's coming. We're bringing lots of people. So I love the fact that we can bring all these great people. I love the fact that we can make stuff happen now. We're going to bring this series through all of 2020. We record each of these. They're on our website. Look at the other ones that are there. I treat them like podcasts now at this point. And if you're here live, you get to actually ask the quick questions. And so it's great. So bye-bye, everybody. Chris, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. And I'll see you soon.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.